to another episode of the Office of Student Veteran Engagement, interviewing veteran alums. I'm Charlie Foster, the director of the Office of Student Veteran Engagement. And with me today, I have Ray Lee. Ray is an oral surgeon, and he is a graduate of William & Mary. He is also a veteran, and so we are so glad to have you joining us today, Ray, to share a little bit about your story and how you've had so much success since you were a member of the tribe. So thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it. And go tribe. You're right. I'm a intense supporter.
That's great. So if you would just start off by telling us your class year, your major, and any kind of extracurricular activities or memorable experiences that you have from when you were at William & Mary.
Okay, so Charlie, my class year was 1976. I was a biology major, and probably my most memorable extracurricular activity was I wrestled on a extracurricular wrestling team at William & Mary. So I had to study so hard, I really couldn't be an athlete. I had a full scholarship to a small college in North Carolina, Guilford College, which I gave up to enlist in the Air Force because it was during Vietnam and I did not want to be drafted. So I decided I would do that. And 2 weeks into basic training, my number came up. I was number 348. So I would have never been drafted. However, I was well into it, and quite honestly, the military was the absolutely best thing that I could have ever done. And I'll explain a little more of that later.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned it. And I'm also glad that you enlisted and did not go to Guilford College, because, of course, that's how you became an alumni and that's how you joined our team. So, yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about your time in the Air Force, what your MOS was, any duty stations that you really remember, and any experiences that are especially memorable to you.
Sure. Charlie, what's really funny is that my only goal was to be administrative. I wanted to be a business administrator. And when I took the aptitude test that the military gives every NCO, I was an airman, of course, they give you a battery of aptitude tests. And my scores were very low in business aptitude. So my recruiter said, "You're not going to have a career in business in the military, but you have very high medical aptitude. You're going to be a combat medic." I'm like, "Combat medic? I mean, dude, Vietnam is going on." And they said, "Well, that's exactly why we combat medics." So off I went, and I had orders for Da Nang, Vietnam, at graduation. They had a dream list during my period in tech school, and if you scored high in your training, you could go to any base that you put down on your list. Well, my first choice was Langley Air Force Base, Langley, Virginia, Hampton, Virginia. Mm-hmm. And I got my orders for Da Nang, and I told my sergeant, I said, "Well, sir, I was number one in my class, and I had Langley Air Force Base." He said, "Well, we're going to honor that as soon as you get back from Da Nang." So I was actually on 4 days from deployment, and my orders were changed, and I was shipped to Langley Air Force Base, where I immediately cross-trained into dentistry and fell in love with dentistry. And I knew at that moment I had to be a dentist, which meant I had to go back to college. And this was in 1976, so actually it was 1973. They being Governor Mills Godwin, had warned William & Mary that if they did not accept more inmate students, they were going to lose their state funding. So I come along, I'm a Virginia resident, I'm off campus, I'm married, and I'd be a commuting day student. They scooped me up like, my goodness, what we're looking for. 3 years now in the military, not really studying collegiately at all. I was thrown in with some of the sharpest minds I had ever been around. And you can imagine what the bell curve did to me. It was brutal the first half of the first semester. It was absolutely brutal. So I'll never forget this. And I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I will, hoping it'll help some veterans out there. Organic chemistry, my first exam mid-semester, this professor actually tried to talk me out of pre-dentistry and pre-medicine, telling me that I really needed to drop this because there was no way I would be able to do it. Well, that made me even more determined. And because of my military background, I'm going, oh, I can't take that hill. Watch this. So my entire attitude changed. My study habits changed. I immediately focused on finding the brightest students in each particular course that I really needed some help in. And they actually, in study groups, taught me study habits. And it's all about study habits. And once you lose those by being in the military, you regain them quickly when you're around the right people with the right skilled study habits. And so I found myself not only becoming adept because I'm around those with great study habits, but I even use those to modify them for my personal use. And by second year, my sophomore year, I was rolling. I mean, I was ready to go. And fortunately, had I not had the military experience, I would not have had the stamina to work so hard and study so hard to achieve the excellence that, I think I achieved by being there. So that's really my background for my time at William & Mary. But as I reflect back on William & Mary, beyond a doubt, and I've been to, obviously, dental school, and I've been to oral and maxillofacial surgery residency with a lot of didactic there. William & Mary was the hardest thing that I ever did. But I found out that William & Mary diploma was the key that unlocked all the doors that were yet to come in the future. And I am so grateful for that. It was hard work, but it's one of the finest collegiate institutions that I know of. And I tell all your veteran students, hang in there, be diligent, work hard, and if it's not working, you can find a way to make it work.
Well, that is great to hear. I certainly agree about the institution and all of your advice, especially about the working hard and about viewing every hill as one that we can take no matter what. It's interesting to hear you mention your transition to the military. So did you separate and go directly to William & Mary?
No, actually what happened was I had taken a couple of online courses, well, not really completely online. It was part-time community college work, but none of the credits were accepted. And the answer to your question is, in Hampton, I had a friend who was a PhD in psychology. And this friend had a best friend that was in the admissions department at William & Mary. I had been accepted to Lynchburg College, and I was scheduled to start the fall semester. My friend, the PhD psychologist, said, well, I don't want you going to Lynchburg College if you want to go to dental school. You need to go to a school that they'll recognize. Let me call my buddy at William & Mary. And I'm not kidding you. This was, in May. So May, my friend calls the admissions buddy at William & Mary, and he said, I'll interview him. Absolutely. I had an interview in June, and I was accepted by William & Mary later in early July. And I started that semester at William & Mary. So yes, I did go directly to William & Mary from the military.
Well, that's great to hear. Do you remember, I know you had a great recommendation for working with your fellow students to, in a lot of ways, kind of steal their great study skills and their great study habits. But do you remember anything culturally about working with folks who were out of the military so soon after you got out? Because one of the things that our students have to do, and one of the things you did with such success, is go from being surrounded by people working as a team and then go to a little bit more of an individual based situation. So do you just remember anything at all about your transition in terms of just the cultural kind of shift?
Well, see, then was a very different time than now, I think. We had the Vietnam uh, anti-political rallies, and I'm a GI. And so I found there was a lot of interest about what's it really like in the military to those individuals who were really high school graduates. Now they were college freshmen. They had an interactivity with the military. I was able to bridge that gap. And in bridging the gap, it helped those students that didn't know a lot about the military and maybe didn't have a lot of respect for the military to take a totally different venue. And today, we honor our military much more than they did when I was a freshman at W&M. So I would tell our veterans today, you're a very, very, very special subgroup of human beings. You are already honored by your colleagues and your peers. And so culturally, that should draw you closer together. During those times in Vietnam, we were not as honorable in all the students' eyes. You know, today, the military has a very different status. The veterans today are honored much greater. We have been through something in the Gulf crisis that we have never seen before. And so today, the students who have never been in the military look at the veteran in a totally different way. You know, there's much more honor there, I'm sure. And having not been in the military, I'm sure women Mary students get chill bumps when the American flag unfurls.
I certainly can say that the two student organizations that the student veterans are working with for next year for September 11th, and we got our fingers crossed that we'll be back on campus for that, is the Student Democrat and the Student Republican organizations want to work together with the student veterans to plant American flags on campus for September 11th. So that's something that they already do. Those two groups already do. And now the veterans are going to work together with them. So I think that really does kind of drive home the point that you just made, that there is a good connection with the student veterans and the traditional students, the typical students you think of along that exact imagery, along the American flag itself. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. Another thing that I like that you said was that the William and Mary experience was the key that unlocked doors for you. Can you just talk a little bit more about how your William and Mary experience and maybe even also your military experience kind of got you through those doors?
I'll be happy to. Charlie, as I said before, basic training and the military was not an easy goal. It was very difficult. We were in times where the basic training was trying to stretch you to your limits. They wanted to break you or find the breaking point psychologically and physically. And we were determined there would be no breaking point. So having experienced that and lived that, you're ready. Oh, you're ready for anything that comes along. And when we came to William and Mary and how difficult and how hard we had to study and work, well, guess what? There wouldn't be a breaking point. We would get it done. So that's how the military experience helped. Now, William and Mary had a reputation then, as it does now. It's a standout school. I remember when I had my interview at Baylor College of Dentistry, and I had a grade point average that was not a competitive grade point average today, but then it was an A minus. It was around 3.5. Well, 3.5, you'd have a very difficult time getting into dental school, medical school today. In 1973, at Baylor College of Dentistry, um, my interview, the director of admissions said, well, you have a grade point average of 3.5 from William and Mary. And I happened to have with me at the interview a publication. It was a William and Mary newsletter publication. And the article stated that a 3.5 grade point average from William and Mary is equivalent to a 4.0 at any other institution in America. And so I happened to have that with me. And the Dean of Admissions already knew about William and Mary. And he said, don't worry about that. A grade point average of 3.5 from William and Mary, that's equivalent to a 4.0 anywhere else. And that's an honest statement. So it opened that door pretty quickly. I was accepted early decision at Baylor College of Dentistry because I was a William and Mary grad.
Well, let me tell you, I'll go find that newsletter so that I can get a copy for all the student veterans, and they can take it with them on their grad school applications, but then also for their job interviews too. Would you say, I mean, one of the things that I talked about with the Cohen Career Center, for example, is helping to translate a military background for the civilian world for the first Civ Div. So is there, what do you think about translating the military background? What are the kinds of things that you think definitely do transfer from the military to being a civilian?
Number one is work ethic, of course. Number two is the fact that we are all in the military. We're a team player. We accomplish the mission. And I think that you can generate that philosophy in the workplace. It's more difficult to generate that philosophy on campus, but yet you can do that in study groups. But when you enter the workplace and you're in your career, your military background is going to bring forth a camaraderie in accomplishing the mission where you're a team player. And I found that to be very, very, very beneficial.
I think that one of the aspects that that you touched on there is leadership. I think when we're in the military, you know, we're always on a team, and that team involves either a leader or sometimes we're the leaders ourselves. And I know that you're the leader of your practice, for example. So do you have any advice just on leadership in general, just about how to be an effective leader, how to lead a team?
Well, the only advice that I can give you on that particular subject, when we think about leadership, there are qualities ingrained in each of us that define leadership, and we'll all define it in somewhat the same way, but we'll have different qualities. I think the thing that was most important to me is that you think about this. We are all leaders, no matter what our capacity and no matter what our title, because we have others around us that are watching every move we make. They're looking at our body language. They're watching our behavior. And we have to assume that we are a leader to lead the rest of our team, even though we may not be the president, the squad leader, the commanding officer. You are still a leader, leading those around you to accomplish the goal of the mission.
That's great. And one of the populations that I sometimes share these videos with is the ROTC department. And so there we have the cadets who are going to go on to be military officers, and they're going to be young officers. And so I think they are going to be in some positions like you were talking about, where they may not be the overall leader, but they may have a chance to demonstrate good leadership qualities. And so I think that's definitely going to help with them too. one thing that I wanted to make sure to give you a chance to talk about is your nonprofit. So Operation Restore Oral Health. Is there anything that you wanted to say about that? You told me about it a little bit. I love it. And I just wanted to make sure to have a little bit of time so that you could tell the group about it.
Absolutely. And the veterans are very dear and near to my heart. And I happen to be in a specialty that we're able to give back. And giving back to the veteran, there are many areas of service that aren't covered by the Veterans Administration. For example, dental implants sometimes, missing teeth, the ability to function and even smile. We have an organization which I helped found called Operation Restore Oral Health. And you can visit the website, operationrestoreoralhealth.org. And you can see that we have helped veterans all over America regain their confidence, the fact that someone cares enough for them to restore their mouth with teeth, implants, and it's just a rewarding thing. But remember, you do not have to be in Operation Restore Oral Health to give back. Think about all the blessings that you have, having gone through the military, and now you're able to give back. So I think giving is what supplies the veteran with real joy. And that's all I can really say about that.
Well, thank you for just, offering those services to veterans, and of course, they're close to my heart too, and everybody who's in the student veteran group. So we're so glad to hear about it from you.
I would like to get the perspective of the women married veteran, how they perceive their time at women married, in collegiate studies and social groups, and it would be interesting to know how they're perceived.
I would love for you to hear from them firsthand. I mean, I can tell you what they tell me, which
Right.
is it's a lot like you. They have a lot of great experiences, and they have some that are a little, difficult, obstacles, that sort of thing. For example, they are sometimes subject to requirements that other students aren't. So basically, there's a writing seminar that every student has to complete called COLL, Call 150, but they couldn't register for it because they were all coming in as juniors because they were getting credit already from either their time in the military or online classes or community college classes. So the process, the official process for veterans, was to contact the professor and get signed in kind of the back doorway. And so there's small little things like that where they miss out on things. And then we've got students who make it to graduation and say, oh, well, I didn't even know there was an outdoor recreation department, or they make it to graduation and they say, well, I didn't even know we had, the ability to stay in dorms, for example, because I just assumed that none of them were staying in dorms and they were all living off campus. But now we've got a guy who's living in a dorm and he's applied to be a resident, an RA next year, so I think he's going to have the cleanest hall on the whole, on the whole. But
there's no question about that, Charlie.
Absolutely not. And so, it's pluses and minuses. They go in and they say, I don't like my group, my small group. And then they come away at the end and they say, well, we had a great experience and, I've learned this and now they have friends. I'm glad that you mentioned that you wrestled because we had a guy who came right in and at first when he got here, he said he could go the whole day on campus without talking to a soul. And then he joined the rugby team. And by the end of his time on the rugby team, they had a highlight reel of him knocking people into next week, and he's he's a Marine, and so he kind of needed that outlet, and he became a leader within that group. So, they're having all sorts of experiences, which is what we want. I think the thing that I'm concerned about is, do they have any setbacks that are going to prevent them from going forward, that are going to stop their progress? And I think you know better even than I do about the possible things that can happen, like PTSD and traumatic brain injury and things like that. And so we do have some who come in needing to work through, if not the student health center, then the counseling center and some of these other things. And we got to make sure that they have access to that and that they can get the accommodations and some of that other stuff. And having this office helps them know where to find the information.
Charlie, I think that you have touched on something that is probably paramount and the apex for the veteran having a successful career at William & Mary or any school by that means. Every individual veteran is going to be very different, and you're going to have to be very sensitive in understanding the needs of that veteran. And it could be post-traumatic stress syndrome, head trauma, whatever. For me, maybe I was overly sensitive, but I didn't think the William & Mary professors gave a crap about whether I was there or not. As a matter of fact, there was a time early on when I was convinced that every William & Mary professor was trying to weed out the weak and keep the strong. And I became very defensive to that. Well, what I really needed was a support group of students to say, hey, look, we're all going to work together so that we can be the strong. You know, I needed special support. The professor today has a different view toward the students than they did in the mid-70s. It's just a perception that I have. But I would say finding the needs of the veteran and having ways that you can address those needs in a very specific manner is going to be key to any veterans group.
Absolutely. And they teach me every day, you know. I mean, they come up with some new idea, and if it's their idea, that's how I know it's a good idea, is because it's coming directly for them. For example, they wanted to start a sponsor program because they remember when they got to a new duty station, they would be assigned a sponsor. And that person was there to answer their questions, show them around the installation, and kind of help bridge the gap from them being a new guy or new girl to them being completely oriented for what's going on there on that installation. And so they said, can we start something like that? And I'm like, absolutely, because you're going to have to be the sponsors. So if you guys want it, and if you want to do it, then we're starting that sucker up. And so that's going to happen in the fall. And it's student run.
That's a great idea.
Right.
Exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly what I'm talking about.
So it came from a survey that we did, is that they said, hey, can we start this? And, you know, I put it to the leadership team because they have a Student Veterans of America SVA chapter. And they said, yeah, we can totally stand this up. So we actually have a guy who is a psychology major who's working for a professor who is a Coast Guard retired veteran. And they're putting this together, you know, based off a program that already exists for non-traditional students. So yeah, it's student-led, it's student-designed, and it's going to be student-run.
That's why the veteran is in a subset all of its own. The veteran already has experiences that would enhance collegiate activities because they've been in the military, and that is proof of it. You're just proving it by what you're saying.
They have that can-do attitude where they're always thinking about, if something isn't perfect, then we can improve it, you know. And I've seen that all year.
Charlie, it feels like that you've got a viable and successful program going on already. Any way I can help, you know, I'm here. Locally, live in Williamsburg, practice in Newport News. I would love to have any pre-med or dental veteran shadow me in my office. That would be an open invitation.
Wow. Okay. Well, they're going to see this. And so I hope they will take you up on it. I hope that they will learn from you having to do it the hard way so they don't have to. I hope that they can take all your wisdom and run with it.
Well, there's one thing. I don't consider myself an expert in very many things, but I do consider myself an expert and coming up the hard way, because it was the hard way.
Absolutely. Well, then
I'm,
let's all benefit from that.
yep, I'm living proof that if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I believe it. Well, Ray, thank you so much for taking some time out to do an interview with us and for sharing all your experiences with the student veterans. We appreciate it, and we are so glad that you picked William & Mary, that you did not go to any other college, that you went to William & Mary, and that you're here to help us now.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Hey, God bless you and all the veterans, and you're doing great work. Don't stop. Just keep it going.
Thank you, sir. You know we will.
All right, call on me if you need me.
Will do.